Welcome back, fellow gamers. In one of my anti-deck tech videos, I was asked if I had ever played a stack deck, or if stack was even viable in Commander. Well, not only is it viable, it's a great way to piss people off, and it's also a frequent player in the competitive scene, so it actually does appear quite often. But you might be asking, what is stack? Well, it's a type of deck that denies other players the resource they need to play the game, or stalls the opponent long enough so that you get board state and board presence that you need to win the game. It's quite fun to play if your opponent is someone that regularly annoys you, but isn't that great of an idea to play if you intend on keeping your friends playing the game, or if you're playing against new players, you might not want to do that. Let's go over a few commanders that fit right into the strategy, and what I consider to be one of the better ones is Grand Arbiter Augustine IV. Taxing opponents for 1 extra mana on each of their spells can seriously mess up their tempo and slow their play down considerably. To top it off, your colored spells will be costing less. It's a win-win. The argument can be made that Brago, King Eternal, is the best stack commander along with Derevi. Both have been at the forefront of some of the craziest, most powerful, oppressive stack techs. Derevi was also so oppressive that he was banned in dual commander, so if you're looking for dual commander lists, Derevi is not a good idea. Hiroki Dust Drinker can be a hated commander with the right matchup. You play a lot of mana rocks to get around Hiroki's ability while leaving your opponent scrambling as they try to untap lands and gain access to their mana base. On the other hand of the spectrum, you have Kataki War's Wage that punishes players who use a lot of artifacts. Again, this is a mono white card, and it does hit your own artifacts, so something you might need to think twice about. And Gaddock Teed is a brutal commander to deal with for non-creature spell-based decks. So if you got a blue-red player, that might be a good way to go. So far, though, all the commanders that I mentioned have white in their mana cost. And if you don't like playing white, for whatever reason, you can also go for Thraxamundar. Now, I have a special place in my heart for Thrax, since he was the very first general that I used in my very first EDH deck. He's a fun commander. And I'm not forgetting Leovold, Emissary of Trest, by far my most favorite commander to play with in 2016. I had so much fun the first week after Conspiracy came out. My playgroup thought he was a bad card and a bad general. I showed them. I showed them. The last call out I'll make for generals or commanders is Teferi. Limiting when players can play spells is actually pretty fun to pilot. It's pretty fun. I always enjoy it, screwing up people's turns. All this to say, I've left out a few commander options, but honestly, you can pretty much play any commander for your stack deck. Don't limit yourself to what you see in this video. Alright, now that we got commanders out the way, let's go into single cards. These are going to be the staples that you find in pretty much most stack decks. Winter Orb. This is especially savage if you have a method of untapping and tapping at your own leisure so that the orb is tapped before you start your turn and is tapped at the end of it. Tangle Wire with some form of proliferation works wonders at keeping some pieces on the battlefield tapped. It isn't particularly effective against token decks, so if you're playing a token-based or you're playing against a token-based deck, you might not want to do that. Smokestack likes to pollute the battlefield. With smog-induced deaths are a real thing, and this card works well if you have a high population on the board. Preferably tokens, getting rid of those 1/1s, 0/1s, right? However, the combo really works with the aforementioned Thraxamundar and other sack-based strategies. So if you're going to be sacking stuff, you might as well make it doubly so. Static Orb, though, looks like a card that not many players would play, but when you combo it with the right card, it can work wonders. That isn't to say that it's the only play to make. The card serves a good purpose when you have the board state you want, and you want to keep your opponents on their knees. Are you having an issue with that player who casts a lot of spells early in the game? Are you? Well, Trinity Sphere is actually a pretty good one to go for. Hey, buddy, slow down. Slow your roll. I like to combine Lodestone Golem in my Grand Arbiter Augustine deck for double the tax fun. And hey, if we're going to be doubling the tax fun, why not triple it? So I'll play like a Sphere of Resistance. and that's pretty much my go-to card. It's important to note that the last 2 cards that I mentioned do hit you as well, but you should have plenty of ways of getting around that if you built the deck out properly. Now, to round out the staples, we have utility lands. Pretty standard stuff. Okay, so now that we've gotten out of the staples, let's break this down by card strategy. The most straightforward is just taxing your opponent, making your opponents pay more to play their cards. It's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. So, one of my favorite tax cards, it's expensive though, and it's hard to find, but it's great against matchups that don't play the same colors as you do, and that's Invoke Prejudice. Say what you will about the art, the name, or even the artist, the card is strong. At 4 blue mana, it's also tricky to pull off early in the game, but if you have good mana fixing, it gets a whole lot easier. Defense Grid is another card that I like. This disrupts players who have their decks that take advantage of casting stuff on your turn. Like a Teferi-based deck that I just mentioned. It shuts down casting expensive instances if the game is in its mid-stage, comboed with another taxing effect, and it's downright impossible to play these expensive instances. Energy Flux is a card that I'll always include. Since, Commander is a thing and there are a lot of artifacts, I want opponents spending their extra mana to keep their artifacts on the battlefield. The one drawback here is that stack decks oftentimes take advantage of playing abnormal amounts of artifacts themselves, so this might backfire. The card is strong though, and it's worth mentioning. The same can be said about Hum of the Radix. Artifacts, we don't like them sometimes, we like them other times. Glow Rider is a pretty straightforward card. I don't see it in that many builds, but it is an extra layer of taxation with representation. Now, the next card is one I have been trying to find for a while, so you might have trouble as well. But in the same vein of Prejudice, In the Eye of Chaos is a great taxing effect, doubling the cost of instances. So let's make them pay a bit more. Now, I can't afford the Tabernacle at Penril Vale. If you can, cool. I can't. Thankfully, there's Magus of the Tabernacle, and it isn't really that expensive. Phyrexian Tyranny punishes decks that rely on drawing a lot of cards. Either they will bleed out, or they'll pay the mana, stopping them from playing the cards that they just drew. Speaking of drawing, Rhystic Study is essentially a tax, because most players won't want to give you that free card every time they cast a card. So, get yourself rich or make them mana poor. Now, and she isn't exactly a secret, but Talia, Guardian of Thraben, is a fun taxing ability that comes down early. Same with Vryn Wingmare and Thorn of Amslite. There is also a whole subset of cards that dictate when or if you can cast a card. Angelic Arbiter has been a staple in most of my white decks for years, but cards like Arcane Laboratory, Chalice of the Void, Void Winnower, Rule of Law, Either Sworn Cantonist, Endilion of Rhetoric are shutdown cards. A pseudo shutdown is one of my pet cards, Karavek the Merciless. I honestly love this guy. It penalizes the person for playing cards, and I love it. Now, the next set of cards is taxing your opponent so that they can attack you. If they're unable to cast stuff, they'll at least try to make stuff happen on the battlefield to make the most of what's on there. That is, unless you deny them that right. War Tax, Sphere of Safety, Propaganda, Norn's Annex, Ghostly Prison, Blazing Archon, Ensnaring Bridge, and Archangel of Tice are the ones that you really want to slot in here for that strategy. I'd say the solid bunch. Now, there are cards that help keep permanents locked down. Linvala being one of the big guns. Suppression Field, which causes activated abilities to cost more. Dampening Matrix, Null Rod, and Stoli Silence fall within this category. But I like an extra layer of security in case my opponent somehow is able to square away with the government. I like my opponents to have their stuff turned sideways. Back to Basics is great for hitting those lands. Blind Obedience, Authority of the Consuls, Frozen Ether, Thalia, Heretic Cathar, and Orb of Dreams cause stuff to enter the battlefield tapped. But cards like Vorinclex, Stasis, and Embargo trigger based on certain criteria that can seriously mess up future turns for your opponent. Now, I'll lightly touch on some other areas, like getting rid of the stuff that your opponents are able to get onto the battlefield, So land destruction, which is generally frowned upon, especially a card like Jocalypse, which hits more than just lands. It hits, most of the stuff on the battlefield. You'll also want ways for your opponents to sacrifice their stuff or destroy permanents outright. So cards like Phyrexian Obliterator, Curse of the Cabal, Possessed Portal, I don't know how Portal becomes possessed, but hey, and World Queller are pretty good choices for sacking. Insert It That Betrays for that extra touch of fun. For destroying, there are quite a few common cards that will fit this slot admirably. Now let's go into Search Denial. Aven Mind Sensor, Mindlock Orb are pretty solid cards that perform admirably, while Lenin Arbiter, Obnilixis, Unshackled allow your opponents to search, but that search comes at a price. Sometimes they're not willing to pay that price. Oh, I'm not forgetting this card. You think I'm forgetting it, but nope. I didn't forget about Stranglehold. It doubles as a way to deny players extra turns, which is the last strategy I want to highlight. So cards like Mindslaver, Soren Markov, and Lethal Vapors will cause your opponents to miss their whole turn, while Eon Hub and Fate Spinner will cause a loss of a step of that turn, which, a consistent way of losing turns is pretty good, or parts of those turns. So there you have it. Quite a few cards were slapped onto the list. I did leave out a few so that the imagination can help you create your deck to your own playstyle. Let me know what cards you think I should have put on the list, and let me know in the comments down below. In the meantime, though, you can check out another one of my videos right over here, and if you'd like to subscribe, you can do that right here. It not only lets you know when we upload content, but it ensures that you don't miss it, and it really helps the channel out. It's greatly appreciated. And I also appreciate you taking time out of your day to watch this video and making me a part of it. Until next time, good gaming.